Welcome to the Masto Fitness Podcast. Today, episode 5, we are going to talk about the importance of flexibility, mobility, and range of motion for racers. It's about more than just doing yoga. So this is a quick hit podcast. We'll keep them short and to the point, focusing on the things you can do off the bike to race faster and safer. At Masto Fitness, we work with racers in the real world who have a full-time job, a life full of commitments, and a lot going on, and don't always have time to ride or train. So with that, we provide training off the bike. So days on the bike, whether riding or racing, are faster and safer. And like I said, today, we're going to talk about proper flexibility, mobility, and range of motion. And it's really important for racers for multiple reasons. With proper range of motion, flexibility, and mobility, we can better work with the bike and work with terrain. All three are somewhat similar in the sense that they each have to do with how the body is able to move and work with the machine, but the way we improve each is different. So we'll go into each of those, and then I'm also going to talk about the number one injury I see due to a lack of these three, a lack of flexibility, mobility, and range of motion, and how we can improve that. So we'll be going deeper into that injury as well. So first is flexibility. It's the ability for a series of joints to move unrestricted and pain-free through a range of motion. And flexibility varies widely from person to person. There's a minimum range that's necessary for maintaining joint and body health, but it can really be variable in terms of age, what you do for work, your athletic and non-athletic history are all factors. But flexibility can be improved through dynamic stretching. So this is like things like walking lunges. So there's dynamic and static stretching. And we'll talk more about static in a minute, but dynamic is just like that. A walking lunge. You're doing a movement. You're not just holding one position to stretch a muscle. We're working through a range there when we work on our flexibility. And it can also be improved, though, with static stretching, like I said. So we've got dynamic, where we're doing like a walking lunge, or static, where you're sitting on the floor with your legs extended out front and you're reaching your toes, kind of like the classic toe touch. So this is, I think, probably the most common form of stretching. When people think about stretching or improving it, is sitting and, touching your toes or doing a stretch like that where you're static. The issue there is you want to be careful with this, because you don't want to do this when you have cold muscles. So if you're if you're like before a workout, you're warming up, don't do a static stretch. Kind of the saying is, when you do a static stretch, you lose power for an hour. You're essentially lengthening that muscle and kind of removing the elasticity of it, or like the power of the muscle. So keep that in mind. Working on your stretching is something to be done during a cool down, not a warm up. If you do it on a warm up, we're going to lose power for an hour. So you definitely don't want to do that before you race or before you train. So leave the static stretching for after. Do dynamic movements before. So it'll help kind of warm up that joint and get you ready for what you're going to do without losing any power. And when we stretch cold muscles, we definitely increase the chance of injury, and we don't want to do that. So we want to stretch muscles through static stretching when we're warmed up, and ideally after a session. So then we have mobility, and it's your ability to move functionally and efficiently with little to no restrictions or difficulty. Mobility exercises make the joints flexible and allow them to reach their full range of motion. Mobility exercises are the flexibility of muscles to support joints and make sure the tendons are also more malleable. So proper mobility is a big one in the event of a crash. I think we've all seen some pretty crazy crashes or get-offs professionally, or just videos you've seen. I know each of us probably each has a crash that we're like, oh my gosh, how did I not get injured? And I feel like if you have better mobility, you're going to decrease that chance of injury. Just being able to make sure your muscles and ligaments and tendons can all properly move through a range of motion is going to make sure when you hit the ground and the body's flexing ways out of control to you, things are going to stretch instead of tear. We all know knee injuries, hip injuries that can happen where you didn't actually physically break anything, but you're in a lot of pain and it might require surgery or some recovery time. Having better mobility is just going to decrease the chance there. So make sure to make sure to think about that one when you're kind of piecing together how you're going to train and when you're going to train. Something we definitely incorporate at Mosto Fitness, because ultimately we all know we're going to end up on the ground at one point or another. And let's do everything we can to at least decrease the chance of an injury, because the last thing we want is more time away from the bike. And then we've got range of motion. This is our final one. And this is like the extent or limit at which the body can be moved around a joint or a fixed point. Active range of motion is the range of motion that can be achieved when opposing muscles contract and relax, resulting in joint movement. For example, if we look at the elbow, we need to, if we want to move our arm up, the bicep is going to contract and the tricep is going to release. So that muscle on the front of your arm is what's shortening, and we need to be able to make sure the tricep, the one on the back, can lengthen. So it's kind of like that equal opposite effect. Sometimes we run into racers that have really tight hip flexors, for example. And so while we're doing quadricep or hamstring movements, the tight hip flexor is limiting what that working muscle can do. So making sure that you have proper range of motion is super important, because if we're on the bike and we're pushing and pulling it and squeezing our legs together and then adducting our legs apart to, you know, put our foot out for a corner or whatever it may be, we want to make sure that the muscles that are doing the work to contract can also properly release and give range of motion, so that the other body parts, the other muscles, are able to pull in the opposite direction without causing a strain to the muscle that's not doing the work. And all three of these, this mobility, range of motion, flexibility, they can all be improved through things such as dynamic stretching, static stretching, mobility exercises, and yoga. Each has its own benefit and will help improve your health in and out of racing. It'll reduce soreness and improve your body's ability to react on the bike. So like I said, at Mosto Fitness, we incorporate them all. We do some dynamic movements in warm-ups. We do some static movements in cool-downs for strength. And then we have specific workouts we give during the week as well, whether they're mobility work through yoga, flexibility work through yoga, or we have these sessions we call performance care, which essentially are going to help work flexibility and mobility. You're just going through a range of motions and doing them on repeat a couple times for up to 20, 30 minutes. Those workouts last, and those also help improve all of these. So it's not just as simple as like going and doing some yoga. There's many ways we can do it and improve it. And like one of my favorite is we incorporate into our strength with that dynamic warm up and then that static cool down. Really helps us get the best use of our time, warm up those muscles beforehand. We do our strength and then do some static stretching once those muscles are have been worked and are all warmed up, and it's a safe spot to go ahead and work through those movements. And then, so the number one injury we see at Mosto Fitness, hands down, and this is one actually that's even happened to me, I hate to admit it, is adductor strains. So our adductors are the muscles that we use to squeeze the bike, kind of like between your groin and your inner knee. There's some muscles, and we all know how important it is to squeeze the bike, to control the bike, to have a good feel of the bike. But what we see happen is athletes, racers, they have too developed of adductor muscles, and they're really good at squeezing the bike. But man, if we have to plant a foot and that foot kind of gets yanked, or we fall and we really extend our legs on the fall trying to catch ourselves, that's when we can run into an adductor strain. Because kind of like I talked about a couple minutes ago, those muscles are really good at shortening, but not good at lengthening. So they're really strong and good at controlling the bike, but the second we've got to plant a leg, or maybe we fall and we really extend our leg in a weird way, or our leg gets kicked behind us coming out of a turn, it's all of a sudden you're like, man, I got some kind of pain, a little below my groin. And oftentimes that is an adductor strain. And that is the number one injury we see at Mosto Fitness. Sometimes it doesn't even happen in the event of a crash. I know for me, it happened. I was riding and I was kind of like pivoting off a log in a turn, and I had to just put my foot really far behind me in an awkward position and kind of stretch out my leg. And I could just instantly kind of feel some pain. And I ended up having to do a little bit of PT to get it taken care of. So I really feel like this is something that as racers, we want to be on top of. An injury that can happen so easily and be such a minor movement that can cause such setback, allowing us not to get on the bike. So make sure that you're doing all the things you can to keep your body flexible, make sure you have good mobility, make sure you're able to move around on the bike correctly. And doing movements like we talked about will help make all the difference. Making sure you're doing stretches that lengthen your adductor muscles when they're all warmed up. You're not just really good at squeezing the bike. You can also, kind of lengthen those muscles. And there's a couple different stretches we can do, whether it's a butterfly stretch or laying down on our back with our legs stretched out wide, kind of like a big X. Those are the types of things we can do when we're properly warmed up to help lengthen those muscles and limit our chance of injury. So that's all I've got on flexibility, mobility, and range of motion. Super important, not the most exciting or coolest part about riding, racing, or training off the bike. But if you want to be a complete athlete and give yourself everything you can to be healthy on race day, it's a very important one to incorporate into your week. And next week, we're going to talk about your ideal race day breakfast. I want to make sure everyone is eating the right things when they are heading out to ride or race. And I see a lot of mistakes and kind of fueling and racers not maybe understanding the best way to fuel their body. So next week, we're going to talk about why you want carbs, why carbs are important, and why we want to stay away from fiber on race day. So more on that next week. And if you want to give Mosto Fitness a try, send me a message on Instagram and I'll hook you up with a free week of our single jump training program.